Hello, how are you? Good to see you guys again. Today, I'd like to talk about something very serious. And you know how in Africa we like to talk about racism from the West, how Africa was colonized, how we were enslaved, how we are still being exploited. And but what if I told you that the most dangerous form of racism is actually in Africa itself? Oh, yes, oh, yes. Racism by Africans, for Africans, to Africans. And another word for that is tribalism. Yes, tribalism for centuries has been the disease that has kept Africa divided for centuries. It's just as destructive as international racism, if not worse. This tribalism is internal disunity, and it has kept or enabled rather Africa to be invaded, colonized, and economically enslaved. And today it is why Africa it's generally why Africa remains dependent and weak. But the truth is that Africa has a way out, especially now. That's why I'm talking about it now. The unity of Africa is what is our way out. Unity, economic unity, of course, partial political unity, but unity of Africa under one currency that is gold backed. Yes, you heard me right. One currency for Africa, gold backed. So, but let's talk about this tribalism. This tribalism has kept Africa divided, like I said before, but we can do something about it and unify under one currency, and that's what we're going to talk about. What is tribalism? Let me define tribalism. Tribalism is when a person values his or her regional identity over national or continental unity. Yep. It is when a person or a people believe that because of their language, because of where they come from, they are ethnically superior to the other. Because of their language, ethnic background, or where they are born, yes, that is tribalism. That is racism. It functions in the same way as racism. Africans discriminating against fellow Africans. Well, tribalism, in case you didn't know, was one of the biggest reasons Africa fell into slavery and colonialism. African kingdoms kept on getting prisoners from the neighboring kingdoms, or tribes kept on getting other people from other tribes and selling them to Europeans or Arab slave traders. Sad, but the truth must be told. Colonial powers exploited this and instituted what they call divide and rule. Today, tribalism is still the causes of political instability, weak governance, and lack of continental unity. Tribalism is why Africa is weak today. You see, and that's why it's important somebody has to say this, okay? African leaders focus more on helping their own ethnic group rather than developing their entire country. Elections in many African countries are decided by ethnicity and not competence. Corruption thrives because their own people are valued over the national interest. Tribal mindset means that you can do anything for your own people, or you rather do something for your own people rather than do it for the nation, politically and economically. So, the tribal mindset means that Africa cannot unite economically or politically, and that's bad. Well, what can we do? But let's talk about something that I like to coin. I think I coined it now. It's called post-colonial dependency syndrome. The mental enslavement holding Africa back. Yep. You want to hear it again? Post-colonial dependency syndrome, and it's a mental slavery holding Africa back. What is it? It is the over-reliance on Western systems for financial security, political direction, and validation. African elites trust Western banks more than African banks. African countries still use European and American currencies instead of their own. Somebody's going to say they're being forced to do that. Okay, but let's start today to understand that this is wrong and the status quo must change. Even the richest Africans refuse to invest in Africa. Maybe apart from a few, but most rich Africans do not invest in Africa and do not keep their money in Africa, choosing instead to keep their wealth in Europe or America. Now, this is sad, I know. Don't worry. At the end of the whole lecture, we will get it to parts of what we're going to do and what we should be doing, okay? But let me say a few things. African leaders keep national reserves in Western banks. African governments depend on Western institutions, such as the IMF and the World Bank, instead of building strong financial systems within the continent of Africa. The elite send their children to study in the West, but do little to improve African education. Well, one more, because I don't want this thing to be so sad, okay? One more would be the belief that foreign products, the mental belief that foreign products, ideas, and leadership are always better than African ones is one I don't understand and must stop. Now, recently, we'll talk about it. There's a conflict happening now as we speak in the DRC between Rwanda and DRC and a group called the M23. And we hope it is solved within Africa by Africans. But I digress. Now, why we must stop this post-colonial dependency syndrome is that the West will never, I repeat, never prioritize African development over their own interests. IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, and the likes. The West will never prioritize African development over their own interests. The only people that will prioritize African interests over any other are Africans. It's natural. Okay? Africa is rich, we know. It's rich in resources, yet it remains poor because it does not control its own economy. We know that. If Africans do not break free from this dependency, Africa will remain the weakest link in the global economy. It is already the weakest link. Now, Africa must unite. Have you heard that before? Africa must unite. But in this case, I am saying Africa must not only unite, but it must unite under one currency. I don't think I'm the first to have said this, but it's very important to understand this. Some will say Africa is too diverse to unite, but Europe is also very diverse, but it's united under the EU. Some will say, oh, we have the African Union, but the African Union is not the same with the European Union. The African Union is not an economic unification, and I am talking of economic unification, and not only economic unification, I'm talking of one currency, Africa. You can call it the Afrique. I don't know. I digress again. United States is made up of 50 different states with different laws, but there's still one powerful nation. The reason Africa is not united is because of tribalism and Western interference. We talked about that the last time. Economic unity is essential, and not only economic unity, through a single gold-backed currency. All right? Africa has 40% of the world's gold reserves. 40%. Think about that. Yet, it uses foreign currencies. Does that make sense? 40% of the world's gold reserves, and we use foreign currencies. Come on, guys. Okay, a single African currency backed by gold would immediately make Africa one of the strongest economies in the world. So why am I not allowed to think about that? Why? Think about it. We have to talk about it. We've got to do it. Okay. The CFA, which was the francophone, which is, sorry about that, is still used within the francophone countries, or at least most francophone countries, is controlled by France. This must stop. It must stop. Not personal, but it's not good. It's not ethical. It's not decent. If Africa trades with one currency, it eliminates dependency on the US dollar and the euro. Political unity, it's also very important. Now, when I say political unity, I don't mean that there should be one leader in Africa. No, I mean we must speak as one voice in the political international arena. That's what I mean in the most part. Okay? When China negotiates, it speaks as one country of 1.4 billion people. When Europe negotiates, it speaks as the EU. But when Africa, that equally has about 1.4 billion people, wants to negotiate, it speaks with 54 different weak voices. I know many of you listening to this are not African, but this is time for me to make an African phrase, which is Haba. Haba, Africa. Haba, Haba. So, this is why Africa is ignored in global affairs, because it does not act as a unified power. Now, you see, let's go further. The world is changing right now, and that's why I am speaking about this now. The world is changing. America, China, and Europe are entering a period of economic conflict. Yes, trade war is coming. I think it's already here. Just today, America announced tariffs against Mexico and Canada, and Canada announced its retaliation. I digress again. We'll deal with all that later. Now we're talking about Africa. A trade war is coming. Good opportunity for Africa to get its act together. Okay? Western economies are struggling, and they will look to exploit Africa even more now. Yes, where do you think they're going to try? If there is a full-blown trade war amongst other people I've mentioned, who do you think they're going to turn to offset a lot of the shortfalls? Africa. And they're going to do that exploitatively. If Africa does not unite now, it will be caught in the middle of a global trade war, and will have a lot to use. So, let's do something. Now, in terms of solutions, I would say, let's end tribalism. Let's end this tribalism. I'm nothing other but an African. You are also nothing other but an African. Yeah. I see. One of my students smiled, and she's not African, and she says, well, everybody is African at the end of the day. We all came from, yeah. Thank you. But you know what I mean. And thank you for the goodwill. All right? Africans have to really solve Africa's problems without being bitter and racist about it. And certainly, we need to eliminate the internal racism within us. Okay? We need to develop strong Pan-African leadership. Everybody can be strong in his own country. Nobody is saying that one person's leader is stronger than the other. No, we're just saying come together when it comes to African matters and speak with one voice and not 54 voices. Okay? Let's establish trade agreements between African nations to reduce reliance on foreign markets. I hear you say this after. It's already there. Yes. But there's numerous criticisms. Okay? Right now, you can say we're trying to do it, but we've not. This is 3 years on, if not 4 years on, and if I am still dependent on the dollar for all transfers. Why? I'm still dependent on Western banks for all SWIFT. Why? So we're not doing it. It's not happening yet. For those that say, oh, there's after. And I don't want to turn this into a criticism of after, because it's a step in the right direction. Okay? Let us reduce financial dependency, establish a real, internally minded, free of foreigners in its board bank. A real African-minded, free of foreigners, that is free of non-Africans as directors in its board, bank. Call it whatever you want to call. African Bank of Unity. But that has to be done. And that should be the first step towards unifying the currency. There's a lot of obstacles towards that, yeah. And that's why the number of obstacles that it has, in order to overcome, it has to overcome before it gets done, is exactly the reason why it must be done. So, we need to challenge the exploitative agreements in Western powers. Let's discuss that. Do you know that, I think it was 9 years ago, quote me, please don't quote me too much, but it did happen, that the status quo in terms of protectionism in your economy, and it's called subsidies, internal subsidies, subsidizing your economies, farm products, was halted. And how did the World Trade Organization halt it? They said, well, if you have subsidies in place that protects your farmers or your workforce, you can keep it. But if you don't have subsidies in place, you can't take it on again. Guess who has all the subsidies in place? Europe and America and advanced countries. Guess who didn't have any subsidies? African countries. That is the worst deal I've heard of in my life. It needs to change. Everybody starts subsidizing or nobody stops subsidizing. Globalization can be fair. It can be fair. And so let's do it. Africa must form strategic alliances, and if they do that, we will emerge global powers on equal terms. But remember, speak as one voice in the WTO, speak as one voice in the UN, speak as one voice in IMF and the World Bank. Perhaps you don't even need to be part of that if we get things right in the future, from now and the future. So, for too long, Africa has been the world's greatest resource base, but is the poorest continent. For too long, we have watched while other nations exploit our resources. While we remain divided by tribalism, other nations exploiting our resources, while we remain, I can give you so many examples of that, but I digress again. So, but we must understand that Africa's biggest enemy is not the West, nor is it China, nor is it America. Africa's biggest enemy is Africa's failure to unite. If we want Africa to be great, brothers and sisters, if we want Africa to be powerful, if we want Africa to be, for people to stop exploiting Africa and being treated as second class, then we must unite. The solution is simple. End tribalism, end this post-colonial dependency syndrome, change your mentality, change our mentality, unite under one economy and one currency and one voice. Africa has everything it needs to be a global superpower. So let's do it, man. Okay? So that's what I had to say today. I hope I made a point. I hope I touched people. One Africa. One Africa. One currency. One voice equals African emancipation and development. Thank you guys. I need to go. I'll try and make another one as soon as I can. Okay? Meanwhile, all your assignments, please. All your assignments. Thank you.